Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast, where the great Mike Tagliere is on a one-game winning streak. I'm Bobby Sylvester, the one that let it happen. And you can find us on Twitter at Mike Tagliere NFL and at Bobby Fantasy Pro. Tags, I couldn't wait any longer. We're going to end your winning streak on today's show.
Today's show? I don't even know we're not doing a mock draft today. So this better not be does Mike know everything? Because I think we've established that Mike doesn't know anything outside of fantasy football.
We'll see what's going to happen. Our guest today is Matt Waldman of Footballguys. You can follow him on Twitter at his name, Matt Waldman. Matt, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey man, it's my pleasure. Glad to be back on.
So here's what we have planned today, guys. I wanted to talk about a dozen or so players with some hype, then talk about whether or not we're buying the hype. You might not even realize some of these players have hype just because you think that's the value that the industry's been giving them. But we're going to break it down like Tags was saying before the show. All we're hearing really about players is positive things. And yeah, there's a sense where you would draft someone at a certain point, but some of their ADPs are just too high. So we want to tell you which players to avoid, which players where the hype is real and maybe you can reach for them. We're going to get to that and some news in just a minute, but I wanted to ruin Tag's winning streak first. So that means we are playing Does Tags Know Everything? And today it's Do Matt and Tags Know Everything? So here's the question, and it's an easy one. Well, actually I had to look it up, but that doesn't mean it's not easy. Who sings the hit song, which is number 2 on Billboard right now, I Like It?
Oh, God. Tags knows nothing. I'm going to go ahead and say that. I like it. Hold on a second. I'm just going to think of like a popular maybe artist. Is it Justin Timberlake or something?
Yeah, I don't know if Justin Timberlake's still like even doing music. Nobody knows, man.
I don't know.
This is a fantasy football show. Matt, do you have any idea who this is?
Alfred Nobel, that's my guess.
Okay, I don't know who Alfred Nobel is.
You know the inventor of the Nobel Peace Prize?
The answer is apparently Cardi B, Bad Bunny, and J Balvin. I'm not sure those are real people. I've never heard of them. But this, of course, counts as a win for me and a loss against Tag, so we can now move on with the show.
Shoot me now. Get back to football. Good God. What are those names? Like, come on, people. I know my band's Korn. Like, I like Korn, and it's a dumb name, but the music makes it cool. But those are too far out there.
You know, I was actually thinking about changing my nickname on the podcast to Bad Bunny, but it was already taken, so I guess I'll have to come up with something else.
Bobby's rap name.
Do you have any face tats?
I'm thinking after this podcast, after this combine that comes out, it's just going to be like Superman or something. I had somebody tweet at me. I posted a picture saying, hey, I actually took this combine seriously. Like, I'm not going to run over 6 seconds. And I posted a picture. Someone said, dude, I think that you're going to beat Jerick McKinnon on the bench press because of the picture. Like, he lifted 33 times, 225 pounds. No chance.
Yeah. No.
So do you have any face tats? Because I think that's what you need nowadays to be a pop star.
No, I don't. No, I don't have anything cool except for good fantasy football advice.
Well, see, now we're all 1-1 on this particular show after that question.
Let's call it Bad Beat Bobby. That's your rap name.
Okay.
If you guys have a better name, at Bobby on Twitter, tell him.
My wife wants to be a hype man. That's her big thing. She just like to go, yeah, and then like basically dance around on stage and nobody knows who she is, but still make some bank.
Awesome.
That's her deal. So,
on the fantasy baseball show that we do, I'm DJ XFIP because sometimes I DJ at weddings or proms or stuff like that. And XFIP is like a cool baseball term. So yeah. I don't have anything like that for football.
We are off the rails already.
Yeah. All right. Today's show is brought to you by Sleeperbot. This is where we're holding our listener leagues, which you can sign up, by the way, at fantasypros.com/listener league. But we chose to use this platform because it's just unbelievable. It's sleek, super easy to use. It gives all kinds of custom options like 3-team trades, custom playoffs. I seriously begged my home league to switch over to Sleeperbot, and they caved in. They're going to love it. I bet you do too. Check out Sleeperbot by going to sleeper.app. And again, you can put in an entry for the Listener League at fantasypros.com/listener league. Also, we've got the David Johnson signed jersey giveaway from Pristine Auction going on right now. If you want to enter that, go to fantasypros.com/contest. It takes like 30 seconds to enter. Okay, guys, so I did say we have some news to talk about. We're going to get to these hyped up players here in a moment, but Antonio Callaway, marijuana, I don't know if his story about, somebody else using his car or whatever is real, but I think this means a lot more targets for Jarvis Landry. It just keeps coming together. Matt, what do you think about Jarvis Landry at this point in the season?
Well, I mean, I think that you're going to look at him as being more of your dump down option and your red zone guy, and he's going to be fine as a PPR player. The thing that kind of gets me about this whole news that's interesting is that, with the vast amount of resources that the NFL has, Don't you think that one of the things that you would do is to check and see whether or not any of your draft prospects have viable driver's license? Maybe even before the draft, you would kind of say, hey, you know what? We'd like to get some information collected about your we need your driver's license number so that you can just maybe even check that they have a valid one to begin with, so that, I mean, to me, you're looking at the marijuana, everyone's thinking about that. But to me, the fact that the dude's driving around in a suspended, license, to get your license suspended, you have to have done some stuff as well. And we all know that he had some issues, but dude, you're a professional team. How could you not know that?
I didn't even realize that he didn't have his driver's license. See, that somehow, went over my head.
It was suspended. So you're driving around with a suspended license, and I had somebody on Twitter actually say, well, dude, it's the age of Uber. Like, now we have the Cardi B question, so now we have it's the age of Uber. And I'm thinking, I'm just waiting for someone to say, dude, I couldn't get to practice on time or a meeting on time because my Uber didn't get here in a timely fashion. I mean, the way the NFL teams are about you being late. I mean, Randy Moss got traded from the Patriots. It's a little known fact, basically, because he was late to practice with Adalius Thomas in a snowstorm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I did not know that. That's amazing. After he scored like 50,000 touchdowns in a season?
Yeah, I mean, you're not late in the NFL. You are not late. Back in the day, maybe 20, 30 years ago, there was a player, I won't even say who it is, but he played on the Patriots towards the end of his career, but he was a great player who early in his career still thought he was in college. And they literally got an off-duty police officer to literally escort him around the night before wherever he went out to babysit him and have his keys to make sure he made the team charter because he missed a flight once. They don't truck with that stuff anymore. But but that's how serious they are about that kind of thing.
Crazy.
So, Tags, what do you think, man? I don't know if he's going to get suspended or what, but it's looking more and more like Jarvis Landry is a solid pick in the 4th, 5th round?
Yeah, Jarvis Landry is someone who's moving up my draft board. I don't know how high I'm willing to take him because it just kind of goes back. Now that we're erasing Corey Coleman, now that Callaway might be suspended, now that Josh Gordon's been away from the team for a while, obviously Landry's going to see more targets, and I'm starting to bump him up and move Gordon down a little bit. But at the same time, it kind of goes back to where when you bring in Tyrod Taylor, you bring in Carlos Hyde, you bring in Nick Chubb, it just seems like they want to run the ball. They don't have a sturdy left tackle just yet, even though Joel Bitonio, the rumors are that he's looking really good at left tackle. But I mean, again, we're hearing a lot of good things about a lot of players this time of year. So I think it's a team that's going to be extremely run heavy under Tyrod Taylor, and I think they should be. The defense is built to kind of play that game. Their defense is so much better than people give them credit for. So while I do like Jarvis Landry, I'm not getting to the point where I'm drafting him as a top 20 wide receiver or anything like that. He's in that like 25 to 28 range for me right now in standard leagues, and in PPR, I'll move him up into like that low end wide receiver 2 conversation.
And like Matt said, he's not a touchdown scorer. Yeah, he had 9 last season. I think that was a fluke. The years before that, 5, 4, and 4. He's got 400 receptions in his career, 22 touchdowns. So I'm not going to move him up into my top 20. No chance. There's other guys I like more in that range, but definitely willing to consider him at this point. Now, somebody that's really making me nervous here, and we're actually going to talk about him later in the show, is Carson Wentz. They're sitting him out for the preseason, apparently. How long they sat out Andrew Luck during the preseason last year, and they said, he'll be back in week 1. And then they said, he'll be back in week 6. And then here he is. He still hasn't played in a real game.
I don't know how far. I mean, Matt, what's your take on Wentz? I mean, the ACL thing, I think it's just the Eagles being cautious with it. If it was his shoulder, I'd be more concerned. But the fact that it was his ACL, I'm not as concerned about it. He's apparently doing some stuff off to the side in terms of like, working out and throwing the football and stuff like that. So I don't think it's like he's crippled and he needs another knee surgery. I just think it's more of them being cautious because they have Foles in the roster.
I think I have the opposite point of view, actually, because since spring, I pretty much had him near the bottom of my rankings, and he's climbed up a little bit to the Eli Manning mid-tier range of quarterback too. But he's not in my top 10 and won't be in my top 10 and will not be drafted by me in any league whatsoever. And the reason being is not because he's not a good quarterback, though. There's I would debate about how great he actually is. He's a terrific playground quarterback who, after about game 3, if you actually notice last year, when they realized that he still can't drop back and throw an accurate pass beyond a 3-step drop, that he actually needs to, kind of play in the pistol and hop into position and throw in rhythm. Or when they blitz him, he has to run around and find an open guy, and he still doesn't recognize which side of the field he should be looking at first, to find some of these guys. I mean, he makes some incredible plays. He really does. But he, at the same time, he's a guy that isn't your average pocket quarterback. He's not Tom Brady, and he isn't Drew Brees, and he's not a guy that can play that style of game as well as he should be able to. And when you think about the injury, he also had some lateral issues with, the nature of that knee, as Gene Bramwell mentioned at Footballguys, who's just an excellent injury expert, talking about how that leg had to be immobilized because of the complications, not just with the ACL, but with other ligaments that deal with lateral agility. You got to understand that when you look at those clips all spring long, where you're seeing all these, and it's almost been kind of hyped up in a way that's been ignorant, if you ask me, which is that he's barely able to move around side to side. It's just him dropping back and hopping into position. Well, that's good for, what the Eagles want him to be able to do if they can protect him, which is, basically no more than a 3-step drop or just kind of a hop, set, and throw. But seriously, once the pocket breaks down, he does not look anywhere remotely ready to do that, and I haven't bought any of that. Nick Foles is going to start the year. That's my belief, and I know it's a kind of a contrarian thought, but I don't think he's going to be ready, and I don't think he's going to look good until about November if he can keep his knee healthy enough to be able to, move around and not look like he's a wounded guy.
Yeah, Nick Foles was exceptional in that role. The thing is, he's got some injury issues going on too with his back right now, so we'll see what happens there. I think that Wentz was kind of lifted up by the RPOs, the great offensive line. He's still young enough that he can get substantially better and be the best quarterback in the game eventually. I think he's got that upside, but yeah, right now I've got him outside my top 12 and I've been kind of getting blasted for it, but I'm just super concerned about this injury. I want to go on to the final news item here, and it's kind of minimal. It's just a left guard had meniscus surgery for the Panthers, the guy that replaced Norwell actually, but the reason I want to bring it up, they have a ton of injuries on this offensive line. It wasn't very good to begin with. Are you concerned about Christian McCaffrey, Cam Newton, Matt?
I'm a little more concerned about Cam Newton to a degree. The Christian McCaffrey concern, I mean, if you look at what he was last year when the Panthers decided, almost kind of perversely not to use him in the way that he was at his best at Stanford. Because you got to remember, Stanford is kind of traditional pro style, what pro style used to be, which is basically running from the eye or running from really densely packed alignments and almost like a rugby scrum. And when you think about how good of a between the tackles runner that Christian McCaffrey was, it was kind of sad to watch Carolina really just make the wrong choices with trying to use him early on, which was all these kind of, it wasn't so much running him outside, but the way they tried to do it. They out-analyzed themselves in terms of trying to be tricky. And as it turned out, it didn't, teams just kind of were like, this is predictable because you've gone too far to one end that it just kind of circled around. But when they actually ran him downhill, even with that struggling offensive line, he looked really good. And I think that they're going to do that again. They're going to do that this year. And while the line has some issues, I think that he's a guy that can at least, even with the bad line, can still be a top 15 PPR back.
So, Tags, it seems like Matt thinks that C.J. Anderson is just a pure backup. And Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but Tags, with another injury to the offensive line, does this mean that you'll just be passing on McCaffrey altogether and maybe go to McKinnon or someone along those lines?
Well, I've said all along, it depends on how you want to construct your team. In that, McCaffrey is a high floor option in PPR formats, especially. But the thing is I don't believe he offers you top 5 upside. Where it's like if you want to go with someone like you said, I don't know if McKinnon's there. I actually think McCaffrey might be a little bit safer than him in all formats, just because I don't think McKinnon's a very good runner on first and second down. I think they're similar running backs, actually, the way that you would approach them. It's just I think that McCaffrey might see more targets with the way that the offenses are designed. But a player I would take over McCaffrey right now is probably Joe Mixon. I just think that Mixon's the superior talent, and he's the one that I can see jumping into the top 5 potentially. Whereas like McCaffrey, he's just a high floor option. So if you want to build your team with some safety and then take upside later, that's fine. I think he's going in the correct range he should, like that late second, early third round range. That's where I'd feel comfortable. Anything earlier than that, I just think that there's better players on the board.
Okay. All right, guys, let's move on to the meat of the show here. These are players that have been hyped up quite a bit. And the first one, I didn't really realize he had been hyped, but that's because we've been the ones hyping him. Like, I'm sure other people have as well, but it's not common for a rookie to be drafted in the first round, let alone the first 5 or 6 picks in fantasy drafts. That's where Saquon Barkley is going. That's where we're recommending him going. Now, obviously, the Giants drafted him because they said he can be a Hall of Fame talent. He's maybe the best running back to come out since Adrian Peterson, maybe even since before then. Now, Matt, are you buying the hype on Saquon Barkley being this good that he can change an entire offense?
No, not at all. And the potential is there, maybe 2-3 years down the line, but this team needs to get an offensive line. And this offensive line is going to have to be significantly better, because I remember, 2-3 years ago, there were people in the fantasy community talking about how Todd Gurley was potentially a fraud after a good first year when they had a horrible offensive line and a very simplistic kind of offensive system. And suddenly you actually put just competent players around him. And now he's, one of the best offensive producers in the league. And he's a terrific running back, and that never changed. But Saquon Barkley, unlike Todd Gurley, who was one of my higher ranked players, as talented as he is physically and as good as a receiver he is, and he does make some pretty good decisions often. One of the problems that he does have is one that plagued Jamal Charles, one that plagued LaShawn McCoy, C.J. Spiller, Lawrence Maroney, and as you can see, half of them have been good players. The other half never really became good players. And that's the fact that he relies way too much on his athletic ability, and tries to bounce things outside. Or when he gets into a crease, he sees an unblocked defender and he tries to reverse his field when he could have just kept his pads down and gotten the easy 3 to 5 or even 7 yards on a play. And he did that all too frequently against teams that overmatched his offensive line. And if you think that that's only going to happen, Penn State versus Ohio State, or, a Big Ten team that's a powerhouse that may have overmatched Penn State's line, then you've got another thing coming when you look at the fact that, oftentimes defenses are going to get the better of offensive lines in the NFL game. So while he's a terrific player, I have him in that realm of some of the best players I've scouted in the past 5 years, but he wasn't even the best on my board.
Now, Tags, I know that you disagree here, and the main reason that I do is that he's going to get 350 touches, and you can't replace that. Plus, I've seen far less talented rookies come in and just bust up the league. I understand a lot of them were in better offenses than this. I think the Giants got better, though. Would you agree, Tags, or is there something more to it than that?
I think there's a middle ground here. And I think it comes down to, I think Matt's correct in his assessment that Barkley he wouldn't have been my top prospect over, I don't think he's been the best prospect since Adrian Peterson. If I'm not mistaken, Matt, I want to say your top prospect that you love is Nick Chubb. And it's funny because I ended up getting him one draft later, and I knew Matt would have been proud of it. But Barkley, in terms of him, I actually agree with you. In my scouting profile that I did on him before he was even drafted by the Giants, I said that he has a tendency to bounce runs outside too much, kind of like a Bryce Brown, effect that he has. And do the Giants have the offensive line to support a running back like that? Where I think Barkley would have been better off behind an offensive line that like the Steelers, like Le'Veon Bell would not be the running back that he is today if it wasn't for the Steelers offensive line allowing him to be that patient running back. Where Saquon is going to bounce runs outside if he doesn't find a hole. The reason I like Saquon in fantasy, however, this year, and the reason I would draft him as a top 5 pick is because when Pat Shurmur comes to the Giants, you kind of seen what he did with the Vikings last year. The offensive line play was not great with the Vikings, regardless of what people think. It was not great. But the play calling was. You saw Dalvin Cook, you saw Jerick McKinnon, Latavius Murray. All these guys succeed under Shurmur because of the play calling. Going to the Giants, they have so much talent on the outside with Odell Beckham, with Sterling Shepard, with Evan Engram, that teams are going to be forced to respect the passing game. And that's something that, Case Keenum, he was left for dead, and all of a sudden people had to respect the passing game with the Vikings. And I think that's why it opened up for the run game. The question, however, Pat Shurmur, will he be a Hugh Jackson? This is my only concern, is that some guys are destined to be offensive coordinators and some guys are they can't do it as a head coach. They can't take on all that responsibility and continue to call the plays at an efficient level. Because Hugh Jackson was a great offensive coordinator, but he's not a good head coach. So that's my only concern here. But as Bobby mentioned, when you're getting, 300 plus touches, if you stay healthy, you're automatically going to finish as a top 10 running back. And I think Barkley is much better than an average running back. And the fact that he's going to be used in the passing game as much as he is, the fact that they used a number 2 pick on him, That's why I'm drafting Barkley there. So I think there's a good middle ground between you guys.
Man, a point about this that I think is kind of interesting that just worth exploring here is that the assumption that he's going to get that many touches. And the reason that I wonder about that assumption is not so much because of the passing game, but because of that defense. And you have to understand that sometimes with game scripts, if your defense is really bad or is put in some situations where it cannot, keep the team close, or in game scripts where that they can actually run the ball on a level with, volume, I think that becomes an issue. I think I would prefer him as a PPR play than I would as a standard play. And I think I do lean more towards your middle ground with that. But I just think that when you look at this situation, you look at Cleveland over the years, they've had a good offensive line when they were healthy, but their defense wasn't very good. They didn't have a really strong quarterback. And if you have a bad offensive line and the quarterback kind of gets, has issues with that, and Eli Manning certainly can have issues with pressure, that's the one kind of danger point that I have, is where I look at him and go, top 5, top 15, sure. The problem is are you really going to get him in the top 15? And most likely maybe at the end of round 1 in some leagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I understand that, and I definitely think that's true for guys like Jordan Howard, and even Leonard Fournette, who we saw the Jags not use at the end of games, remarkably. But with Saquon Barkley, they've been lining him up outside in the training camp, and they say he's one of the best receivers on their team. He looks phenomenal in the passing game, so I'm not sure that I buy the game script thing applying to him, because we've seen these running backs be used when teams are trailing in the passing game just an absolute ton, and in some cases it's an advantage to them.
Yeah, as long as it's not Reggie Bush. I thought Reggie Bush everyone said the same things about Reggie Bush and how great of a receiver he was, and certainly I would say that Barkley was within that tier. I've certainly graded both. He's certainly in that tier, but the issue is are they going to figure out how to use him well enough to be able to do that, and it fits into the script? So he's one of the most intriguing players of the year.
All right, so talking about another running back that was under Pat Shurmur, now he's under maybe an even better offensive mind. Jerick McKinnon is playing under Shanahan in the San Francisco offense. They've got Jimmy G. This team was dreadful last year until Jimmy G came along. They had a weaker schedule, but they started winning games. Is this going to be a really good offense, Tags? And is McKinnon going to be used like a workhorse the way that everyone seems to be hyping him up as?
It's going to be a really good offense. And the fact is, Jimmy G, while we give people crap for drafting him as a top, 7 quarterback or whatever people are doing now, I think it's really impressive to do what he did last year in terms of coming to the team mid-season, starting, kind of on a whim. Nobody thought he was going to start. What is it, the final 6-7 weeks that he started? He played really well, and I can't take that away. And he did that with a depleted wide receiver core. Like Marquise Goodwin was the only one out there who is a starting NFL talent, I think. So I do think it's going to be a good offense. My concern is actually about McKinnon as a talent. I think the Vikings always anticipated McKinnon taking over for Adrian Peterson. Then they found out he wasn't that running back. They started Matt Asiata over him down the stretch. Last year they had Latavius Murray obviously forced his way in to lead that timeshare. Jerick McKinnon is a fine NFL player if you know how to use him, and I think Kyle Shanahan's going to figure that out. The question is, will Jimmy Garoppolo check down more than he did at the end of last year? Because Carlos Hyde, his targets with Jimmy Garoppolo were like less than half than what they were before Garoppolo took over. So I know they're using McKinnon all over the place, but they do have Goodwin. They are getting Garcon back. They did draft Dante Pettis. So there's a lot of pieces here. I mean, it's tough for me. Because I don't think that Jerick McKinnon's a great 1-2 down back. This offensive line is a work in progress. They improved it a lot this offseason. I'm not going to say they didn't, but sometimes when you add pieces, it takes time for them to gel together. I'm really curious on Matt because he's a really big film guy. And what have you seen on McKinnon to make you believe that he'll succeed this year, or maybe that Matt Breida might be a good sleeper?
Yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, back in the day when he was at Georgia Southern, I talked with some NFL scouts that I know who before the draft were talking about him just as an athlete and how good of an athlete he was and how rare of an athlete he actually was at that time. And the thing is that people get, especially in fantasy football, they get seduced by athletic ability, and they often give extra bonus points or overcompensate towards athletic ability, especially every time they see some display of that. And because it's easier to understand about what athletic ability is as opposed to technique and concepts and scheme and how those things fit together. And he's a good example of a player who's had to learn on the go how to be a running back at the NFL level and not just playing in an option offense, as a wing back or a fullback, as being a former quarterback, a former option quarterback as well. So he's someone that has progressively gotten better, but he's not someone that when you think he's going to be the Devonta Freeman of this offense. Now in role, he's going to be Devonta Freeman, but he doesn't run with the ferocity that Freeman does. And when I say that, technically what that really means is that does he accelerate into contact the way Devonta Freeman does to get extra yards? Does he press the hole tight enough also to really get behind the lineman and then be able to cut back to create that crease by setting up blocks in that zone scheme? I think he's going to be a decent outside zone runner for them. Inside zone, he'll be, I think that's where he'll probably be lacking, or when there's penetration into the backfield and he has to be creative in a way where advanced backs have really worked on their footwork in a manner where they really kind of have figured out ways to avoid and get downhill. And backs who are just good athletes, but not that advanced at it, don't have that caliber of footwork. Now, he's very quick. He has worked out with a renowned footwork coach who's worked with guys like Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders. But there's a difference between translating theory into practice, and I'm still waiting to see whether or not he has that, because I'm sure a guy like Kenyon Drake has been working out with guys like that. And when you watch him, when there's penetration into the line of scrimmage or something's disrupted the flow of what he's following, you see him do what a lot of great college athletes do who are not refined players, which is they try to jump cut away, but they hop about a yard and a half towards the target or towards the defender before they change direction, as opposed to doing what, say, like Chris Johnson, who was really great at this, was being able to just open up the hip, like take your the instep of your foot and point it to the sideline. That opens your hip, and with a minimal amount of steps, you're able to bounce outside and get away. So, you look at this situation, and then you understand also that I'll just add this. I was impressed with Garoppolo as well, because, he came from an Erhard Perkins offense, which is, much more efficient play calling verbiage. And it's really basically a set number of plays that are just the motion and shifts basically change things up a little bit, but the routes are essentially the same for each play. Whereas when you do a West Coast call, like what they do in Shanahan's system, the verbiage is a lot heavier, a lot more dense, and there's, usually a lot more plays in the playbook. So the fact that he was able to come in and play even in a partial form of that offense and perform well was a testament to him.
Now, Tags, I have a question for you before you respond to that, okay? Do you know who replaced Jerick McKinnon at Georgia Southern when he graduated?
No.
Matt Breida.
Are you serious?
That's right.
Yes, isn't that amazing?
That is amazing. I did not know that. I didn't start.
And as amazing of an athlete as Jerick McKinnon is, Matt Breida might be better in terms of the combine metrics.
I don't know, man. There's a lot of people that go to bat for Jerick McKinnon, but I think that was a good breakdown by Matt, and it kind of like aligns with how I feel about him. I don't think he's a guy that's going to generate 250 carries in a season. I just don't think that that's the type of guy that you want him to be, and I think Shanahan will pick up on that. And I've talked about Devonta Freeman on this podcast before, saying that I think he's severely undervalued as a running back. I think he's legit one of the top 3 down backs in the NFL, whereas Jerick McKinnon's just not in that conversation. But for fantasy purposes, I do believe Jerick McKinnon's an RB2 this year, because of the offense he fell in. I think he's going to have some big weeks. I think there's going to be some where it's not going to be so great because it's going to be a shared workload between him and Breida if they have a good game script. But it's another team that the defense is, they might have a ways to go. The San Francisco defense, so the game scripts might favor McKinnon a lot more than they do Breida. So, I think we're all on the same page here.
Yeah, I've got McKinnon at RB15, so I'm not super excited about him. I don't see him as being some kind of workhorse monster or anything like that. And just because they used Freeman in that way doesn't mean that they will use McKinnon in that way. Good coaches use the talent they have. Look what Bill Belichick's done, right? He won with a deep passing game to Randy Moss. He won with a power game with LeGarrette Blount. He won with defense. He wins with everything. I think that Kyle Shanahan will take his players, what he has on the roster, and use them to the best of their abilities. And that doesn't mean they'll be Devonta Freeman and Tevin Coleman. Agree.
And the next player, Bobby, I need to mention this one because I just want to say his name because I've been seeing it on the sheet here and I'm like, I just want to say it. So Matt, I hope that you are as high as me because I haven't heard your take on Stephon Diggs, but Stephon Diggs I think is a legitimate breakout candidate. Like I believe that I think he could be a top 5 receiver in the NFL. I think he's severely underrated by a lot of people. But the thing,
people are drafting him after Adam Thielen, man.
But here's the thing. This is what I was going to ask Matt. If you have to pick one receiver this year for them, who is it? Because both of them are not going to finish as top 12 wide receivers. It's not going to happen. So, Matt, where do you lie on the whole Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen conversation?
It's interesting to me. I mean, I actually think that I still think there's a good chance that they could be both in the top 15, mainly because when you look at Kirk Cousins and the amount of yards that he threw in an offense in Washington with a bad offensive line, there's still that possibility that can happen. Now, the thing is that both guys like to play in the slot. They use them in their offensive system a lot in the slot, and that helps both players. Now, I think that Diggs is an excellent route runner, and he does have that big play opportunity as well with the speed. I think that Cousins will see him kind of as his advanced version of Jamison Crowder, the type of player that a lot of draft analysts thought Jamison Crowder would be is actually Stephon Diggs. I don't think Crowder's ever going to be that kind of talent, but so when I look at it from that standpoint, the jury's out for me though on Cousins in terms of his ability to handle interior pressure, and I think he's going to deal with more of that in Minnesota than he may have dealt with in Washington. So when I look at this as a whole, I mean, I think it's going to be a good offense. I think that I don't know if it's going to be a great one. And so, usually the best quarterbacks the best quarterbacks can support 2 to 3 options who are, top 15, top 20, in the passing game. I don't know if they're quite there, but Diggs to me would probably be the safer guy, mainly because he gives you the fullest range of expression as a receiver, both in the short game and in the deep game.
Now, Tegs, where are you taking Stephon Diggs? I've got him in my top 11 wide receivers. I've got Thielen back at wide receiver 18, and I'm wondering if I'm too high on both of them. I know that a great offense can support 2 really good wide receivers. We talked about last show how the Packers back in the day when Randall Cobb was last healthy, he finished 6th, and Jordy Nelson finished 3rd. So is this something the Vikings offense can do, is support 2 top 15 or even 2 top 20 wide receivers?
I think 2 top 20 is realistic. I have Diggs at 12. I have Thielen at 22. So I don't think it's definitely not out of the question. But with the fact that Kyle Rudolph is there still, the fact that, they have Dalvin Cook out of the backfield who, he was considered a 3-down back coming out of college too. So, there's only so many targets to go around when you have a defense that the Vikings do. And that's my big concern here is that Kirk Cousins takes a step back in terms of volume that he's had over his career. Kirk Cousins, and even going through his numbers that in a series I've released recently, Kirk Cousins has been a bit of an up and down quarterback. He's had some really good weeks. He's also had some pretty bad ones. Jay Gruden has traditionally produced some pretty good quarterback performances. So I don't know. This is going to be a different offense as well. People forget that Adam Thielen saw 143 targets last year, and that's what it took for him to finish as the wide receiver 8. Does he have some positive touchdown regression? Sure. But I'd be shocked if Adam Thielen sees more than 115 targets. So even if he does have some positive regression in terms of his touchdown numbers, you're going to see those targets dip more to the point where I think Adam Thielen drops back into the pack a little bit. And he was only a wide receiver 2 50% of the time last year. 56% of the time was when he was a wide receiver 3 or better. So he had some down performances. Whereas Stephon Diggs, I think we're slowly seeing like the career arc, kind of like we saw with Antonio Brown. We saw some breakout potential with Antonio Brown, but it was never on a consistent basis until Mike Wallace was kind of phased out of the offense, or actually left the team, I should say. Adam Thielen didn't leave the team, which makes me believe that Diggs is still going to have some ups and downs, but I think Diggs is the better talent, and I also think that Kirk Cousins is going to end up finding him a lot more than he does Thielen. And to know that there were no NFL duo of wide receivers last year that had more than 107 targets apiece. So you kind of have to pick your poison and say one's going to finish top 12 and the other one's probably going to finish in the wide receiver 2 conversation. My money's on Diggs just because I believe he's the better player, and I think Cousins, his skill set better matches Stephon Diggs.
Plus, you've got Kyle Rudolph as a top 10 tight end. You've got Dalvin Cook as a top 10 running back. I don't think all that happens.
Someone will disappoint is basically what it comes down to.
And I think it's Thielen.
Oh, Thielen's still startable for sure. I think he's still draftable, but he's being drafted as like the number 10 or 11 receiver, which was basically, that's the only reason I say that I'm not going to own Thielen, is when you look at draft costs and stuff like that, it's all factored in. And I believe by drafting him as the 10th or 11th wide receiver off the board, you're drafting Adam Thielen at his absolute ceiling, unless of course something happens to Stephon Diggs, and then, Thielen becomes a top 10 option.
Yeah.
Right.
Thielen right now is being drafted ahead of Doug Baldwin. And Tyreek Hill is being drafted ahead of Stephon Diggs. People.
I'm not down with that.
Ooh,
no.
I don't like that. I do like it because that means I'm getting them.
I'll take it. I'll take that.
All right, next wide receiver is somebody else who's a very high upside receiver. I mean, he is, if you want to talk about someone who's flashed, Juju Smith-Schuster has looked like he could be a superstar. With that said, it hasn't been that long. He did some of it when Antonio Brown was out. He's got a lot of hype going into this season. I've seen this narrative a bunch of times. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes they become superstars. Sometimes they kind of fizzle off like Sammy Watkins did. And some of that was injury-based. There's a lot of excuses for Watkins. There's a lot of excuses for Amari Cooper. But which side are you taking here, Matt, on Juju Smith-Schuster?
I think he's just a solid player, and I don't think that you're going to look at him as a superstar. You got to understand that, when you look at what he offers as a player is that he's kind of that slot outside player combo. And so maybe he gives you that Michael Thomas upside if he has the type of quarterback or the types of matchups he can lead to big plays. And because he's playing opposite Antonio Brown, he's going to get a lot of prime looks. And because of the fact that they can move him around and use him in different looks like that, he gives you the combination of targets to also big plays because they use him as a big play slot receiver. That's where he really shined the most. Does he have that great big play vertical speed to play the X? No, he doesn't. He can be the flanker and he can get you some yards after the catch. He's a solid top 20 player for you in terms of, if we look at him 10 years from now and he stays healthy, you can imagine seeing him have 5 to 7 years where he's a top 20 receiver and then maybe 1 or 2 where he's a top 12 guy. But we're not going to be looking at him as a perennial superstar.
I agree with that. I really do agree with that. I think a lot of people undervalue Juju coming into the draft, but I think it's gotten to the point where people are now overvaluing him. Don't forget, he ranked 55th in targets per game last year. Even if you're projecting him to get some more targets this year, it's tough to produce the way he did with getting so few targets. And as Matt mentioned, they're going to be prime targets with Antonio Brown there. James Washington's a really good NFL wide receiver. Like, he's going to be good. He fits Ben Roethlisberger's skill set better. I don't want to say better than Martavis Bryant because Martavis could stretch the field as well, but he was one of my favorite deep ball guys in the draft. So Juju, he should have the entire underneath to work with. And unless they start targeting Vance McDonald and Jesse James a whole lot, Juju, I would expect him to get around that 90 to 100 target mark. He's going to be extremely efficient with those targets. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger is going to help with that. So I think Matt's assessment is perfect, saying that he's going to have a career living in that, 15 to 24 wide receiver range, and he might have a year or two where he gets up into the top 12. I think that's a great assessment.
Yep, I think that's right on the money, exactly where I stand. Now, you pointed something out, Matt, that I wanted to go back to, and it's not exactly fantasy football related, but it's really interesting to me. So entertain me here, okay? You said Michael Thomas. What would happen if something like Michael Thomas and Antonio Brown were on the same team? Well, what do you guys think? Like, would one of them dominate? Antonio Brown just continues being him and Michael Thomas takes a big step back, or would they just kind of be a little bit worse versions of themselves?
I think that when you take a look at it, I mean, it just depends on the offense that they use. And so when you look at, say, if they were both in Pittsburgh, then you would probably say that Antonio Brown would be the lead guy and that Michael Thomas would be more like Juju Smith-Schuster, but maybe elevated a little bit more because he would be used more in the red zone. And the fact that he can also play, I'd say he's even slightly better as an outside option in terms of his speed. He's slightly a little faster. But you would say that Brown would take a slight dip. You'd see Michael Thomas take a slight, both would have kind of a slight dip to kind of work out within the confines of that offense. Whereas if they're in New Orleans, you have to understand that New Orleans really for years and years has been an inside receiver based offense. They like to target the slot or use receivers who can play, work from the slot to get outside. Jimmy Graham is really a wide receiver. Jamarcus Colston. And then you also take a look at Lance Moore and then you now have Michael Thomas. Most of these guys really thrive from the inside. So if you put Antonio Brown outside, what you'd be getting is a huge upgrade from Ted Ginn. But you would have probably more like Brandon Cooks-like numbers with more red zone potential because Brandon Cooks, basically can't deal with tight man coverage. And so, he's a good fit, with the Rams because they can just throw the ball over his head. Goff has that kind of arm, let him run under it and not be with an older Tom Brady who can't quite throw that deep ball in the same level or in the same degree. And then now Watkins gets to go to a place where he can be a full-fledged receiver because he wasn't going to stay somewhere where literally they were just going to say, here, run some go routes and some post routes.
Sure. I'm looking at the 2000 Rams and what they did. They had Torrey Holt and Isaac Bruce, obviously. They passed for 5,500 yards, even though Kurt Warner missed 5 games. Torrey Holt had 1,635 yards. Isaac Bruce had 1,471. Marshall Faulk had 2,200 yards from scrimmage. I think that would be a lot of fun to see again. Man, I miss the greatest show on turf.
By the way, Michael Thomas is probably the best slot receiver in the NFL when he goes down there. Like, one of the most predictive stats you could find is yards per route run. Michael Thomas out of the slot last year averaged 3.63 yards per route run. The next closest was 2.26. That was Robert Woods. So he's more than he's almost 40% higher than the next closest player on the list. So it's not even close. So yes, in fact, the Saints offense does dominate the slot. I just wanted to throw that stat in there because Michael Thomas is a phenomenal player out of the slot. So Cameron Meredith, that's why a lot of people do like him, but I think that they're going to try and move Meredith around. I don't think that they're looking at him as like a full-time slot guy. I think they're going to move Michael Thomas around the formation as they are Cam Meredith.
So we're going to skip Carson Wentz. We already talked about him a little bit, but I want to talk about another quarterback who's getting a lot of hype. We mentioned him earlier, Jimmy G. Everyone knows what Tags and I think about Jimmy G. He's a statue. He's not going to get any running yards. That limits his ceiling. Even when he was playing in those 5 games last year against weak defenses, he was only the quarterback 9. Matt, where are you drafting Jimmy G?
I think that he's a good guy to have somewhere between the 9th and 12th round of a draft. And if you're going to wait late on quarterback, he's one of those prime targets that you're going to want to look at if you can get him there. Now, there is going to be enough hype that maybe he goes somewhere between round 6 and 9 in certain leagues, where people are a little bit more in a hurry to take a quarterback. But what I like about him is that, when I first scouted him, I thought that there were issues with him in terms of the pass rush, that he would rush his process a little too much, that you would see him sometimes kind of cover up and duck and look kind of more like Blaine Gabbert in certain ways in the pocket.
Yuck.
So there were some issues there that I wondered about, but not, watching him so far in with San Francisco, you really haven't seen a lot of that. So that's a good sign. One of the things that I've really admired about his game is he gets rid of the ball quickly and he has excellent feet in the pocket. Very much like Jared Goff. And that's something that I did scout with Goff, before the draft and why he was my number 1 quarterback and one of my top rated guys, pre-draft, is that it's something that Tony Romo described as quiet feet. And that's the ability to avoid pressure, and do it in a manner where your feet are going to stay under you so that you can get rid of the ball accurately, and within form. And that's something that Drew Brees and Tom Brady have in droves. Russell Wilson has it. You don't have to just be a statue to have it. Michael Vick is a perfect example of a quarterback who had the exact opposite kind of feet. He had loud feet because whenever he tried to avoid pressure, you'd see, and Carson Wentz kind of has loud feet.
He became a running back. Yeah, he couldn't pass the ball.
Yeah, and Carson Wentz kind of has loud feet too in certain regards, because what will happen is he will drop his head, take large steps trying to avoid rather than just be efficient to just move away. The best pocket quarterbacks can take one step and it looks like they're performing some sort of martial art to avoid somebody, because literally the defender's diving and they take that one well-timed step and the defender misses and is just diving for air and the quarterback's throwing the ball in time. But when you have to avoid pressure so dramatically, now you're having to get your eyes back downfield. You're having to start over with who you're looking at with your receivers. Your receivers are having to work harder because you're not just extending the routes that they were running. You're reinventing the game plan. And so Garoppolo was really good at being able to throw within structure even when the structure is starting to break down. So that makes him a quarterback that is worth keeping your eye on. And I do think that he's gotten an upgrade at the receiving core, especially with Garcon back and Dante Pettis, who was an excellent route runner. I thought he was the top receiver in this class. And I think that you're going to see that with the next couple of years.
Wow.
Hey, Bobby, real quick, the Carson Wentz thing, I know you said we were going to talk about him, but I wanted to throw out a stat because, I knew I had it, and I wanted to share it with you guys.
Okay.
So we talked about Wentz, and I think people forgot that he was considered to be, a developmental quarterback, that Goff was the pro-ready one, Wentz was the one that was going to take some time to develop. By the way, last year, Carson Wentz, according to NFL's Next Gen Stats, Carson Wentz threw into tight coverage, one or less yards separation, 26% of the time. No other quarterback threw in more than 23% of the time. Those are the quarterbacks who were closest to him: Blaine Gabbert, Carson Palmer, Brock Osweiler, Cam Newton, Deshaun Kaiser. Those are the quarterbacks who, so when you're on a list, obviously not one stat tells the whole story, but when you're in that type of company, it's not a good thing. And to know that he threw 33 touchdowns to 7 interceptions, there was a bit of luck on his side last year, and it could have easily went, 26 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. So I think this opened my eyes because hearing Matt say that he had him outside of his top 15 quarterbacks, I was like, whoa, really? And I wanted to hear it. And he almost just kind of brought me back to, what Carson Wentz was before last year, is it knowing that it was going to take some time with him, and now knowing that he's not going to play in the preseason. I don't know. The offense is obviously tempting, but it was a eye-opening stat.
Those are great points, Mike, and it's interesting too because somebody shared with me he had sent Carson Wentz clips 3rd and 7+ all year from Game Pass. Just was like, hey, what do you think of this? Because I've been looking at this. When you watch him, I mean, in addition to the fact that they switched from dropbacks to pistols pretty early and said, let's give him what he can do, it was, you do see a lot of those throws into tight coverage and foolish throws, as a matter of fact. And so what ended up happening, though, is because when they went into that pistol and they started operating from the spread, you actually saw coverages that became much easier for them to face after about week 5, week 6. You're starting to see a lot of one read looks, like Alex Smith had a lot of one read looks last year. But you look, and in previous years where basically it's like we identified a really huge mismatch and we just target that. And when Wentz was given the opportunity to just kind of have those one read looks in those situations, which are prime passing down situations, I mean, the defenses were giving up some really easy looks for him as well. So I'm interested to see how defenses adjust to what the Eagles are doing, and if Wentz is healthy enough, how he responds.
Tags, I've got Jimmy G right now as my number 14 quarterback. Now, I understand the reason he's being drafted as the number 9 or 10 quarterback, and I think it's going to continue to rise, is because people see him as having the potential to be the best quarterback in the game. Now, do you think that he has that kind of upside?
To be the best fantasy quarterback in the game? No.
Well, I mean, that's the difference, right? I think he can be one of these superstar quarterbacks, but to be the number 1 fantasy quarterback in the game, you either got to be Aaron Rodgers throwing 35, 40 touchdowns with.
But Rodgers also runs for 350.
Or you've got to be like Cam Newton, who's getting 8 rushing touchdowns. I don't think Jimmy G has that upside. I think, he can throw for 4,800 yards with 30 touchdowns, but he's not going to run at all. I don't think he can be a top 3 fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to, I believe Jimmy Garoppolo is a streamer, and there's a lot of quarterbacks that fall into this territory, and my stat of the day is going to prove all this stuff, because I have a good one for you guys it's actually usable fantasy advice, and one that you're probably going to be shocked to hear.
Yeah. Okay, the next player I want to talk about here is a wide receiver, and this is somebody that I've been seeing get so much hype, and I think it's unwarranted, is Robbie Anderson. Right now they're saying Sam Darnold is going to start week 1. The Jets at least want to make it happen. I think that's bad for his stock because McCown was a quality passer last year. Darnold has a way to go. I mean, there's a reason he was drafted where he was. He's very talented, but he's got a way to go compared to Josh McCown, who's obviously polished. He's at the end of his career. I would even say in his prime based on what he did last year. Now, Robbie Anderson is the number 1 there. He had some flashes last year. Tags, I'm going to let you take this one first. Do you see Robbie Anderson as being somebody that you need to go out and reach for the way that people seem to be doing right now?
Well, I don't think you need to reach for him because I think there's still a looming suspension here with Robbie Anderson. But I've heard the opposite, though, in terms of Josh McCown. They say that he's the best quarterback in camp, and it's not really all that close. I think they wanted Sam Darnold to win the job, but it's just not going to happen. And I think it's the best thing for Darnold's career is to sit back and learn from a veteran like McCown. So I'm actually approaching this as if Josh McCown is going to start the season for the Jets. The defense is getting better for them, but their offensive line is still shot. I'm just shocked that they haven't addressed the offensive line there because it's still bad. But Robbie Anderson, he's going to have more competition this year with Quincy Enunwa, taking control of the middle of the field. I think Quincy Enunwa popped in 2016, where you've seen on film, he could be a legit wide receiver in the NFL. And
I like Enunwa.
I don't know what's happening. I would assume that Jermaine Kearse probably gets cut because he can be cut for free, and then they paid Terrell Pryor.
He could be on the pup list, though, Pryor.
I'm not saying that, that Pryor is better than Kearse, because I don't think he is. But I'm just saying that it seems like there's going to be more competition for targets this year is all. And I think the defense got better. We might see some of the pass attempts come down. So, I mean, I don't think you need to reach for him, but the hype is kind of out of control. I don't think he has wide receiver 1 potential in this offense is all.
Every time I hear this, I shake my head like, hold on a second. Am I missing something? And Matt, what do you think? Are we missing something here on Robbie Anderson?
Well, I mean, I agree with Mike about the whole Darnold quarterback situation at this point, is that it is most likely going to be McCown. And if it isn't McCown, it should be Bridgewater, to be honest. Mainly because and those two guys would give Robbie Anderson the best chance to succeed at this stage. I mean, certainly Darnold is an aggressive player, but he's one of those examples of guys with, I would say, his feet are kind of muddy, and he puts himself in situations where he can avoid pressure, but then when he tries to throw downfield, he's throwing from really crazy platforms. But that's probably going to affect more the underneath guys than it will affect a guy like Anderson, who's going to be more used to stretch the field and be an intermediate to deep player. And he is actually a pretty good route runner. And he's a guy who I think if his growth curve continues, he can be a number 1 receiver in the league, because he is tough at the catch point. He's a route runner that has continued to grow. When you look at where he was as a senior and then moving up, he really has progressively gotten better. And there were a lot of comparisons to his route running and footwork to guys like Chad Ochocinco. And that he was a pretty darn great route runner. But at this point of the season, I mean, I would have to say you're looking at him as a guy that you would rather be drafting as a wide receiver 3 and hoping that he can elevate his game with a combination of good surrounding talent around him. And I will add, I mean, I'm a little higher on, I like Enunwa. He's improved his hands. He's an example of a guy that didn't know good hands technique if it hit him in the face. And oftentimes the ball did hit him in the face at Nebraska, because he didn't have good hands technique. You'd think he was doing interpretive dance rather than actually trying to catch a football. But he's gotten a lot better working on a jugs machine. So I think that there is potential there for him. But I think we are underrating Terrell Pryor a touch. Only because, and I say a touch because you can get him basically for free right now. And if he is healthy enough to go, watching him in Cleveland was undeniable. If you really watch his tape, he was a very good receiver, 2 years ago. And I do think there's credence to the fact that he played hurt early on last year, and it affected his play dramatically to the point that he was dropping the football. And I think that he put a lot of pressure on himself to try and play after this, getting a free agent deal in Washington, and he screwed it up, and they got really angry with him there. So I think there's a chance for redemption for him if he's healthy enough to go.
Are you drafting Pryor? And same with Dante Pettis. You mentioned him earlier as your favorite rookie receiver. Are you drafting Pettis and Terrell Pryor?
No, because they're going at the same time. So I'm getting Pettis usually in the 20th round or the 18th to 20th round, and I'm taking guys like him there. But if he's gone, then yeah, Pryor's someone that I take just because he's free, and then I can drop him in a couple weeks if nothing's going on.
Now I'm looking at ECR right now. ECR, for those of you who don't know, is expert consensus ranking. So we put all the experts together and see what their rankings are. They have Robbie Anderson as the wide receiver 34, number 80 overall. His ADP, which is average draft position, is 19 spots back at 99. So the experts as a whole, the industry, likes him a lot more than the general public. I'm not sure I'm with them, Tags.
I have Robbie Anderson right in that range. I think he belongs in the wide receiver 35 range. I think he's a back-end wide receiver 3. What's my side?
But he's going over Randall Cobb, Marquise Goodwin, Jamison Crowder, Devontae Parker. Are you taking him over those guys?
No, not over those guys, but I'd take him over guys like Cooper Kupp and Pierre Garçon.
And Emmanuel Sanders, I'm sure.
And Devin Funchess. Yeah, I'd take him over those guys because he presents some upside. Like we've seen him do it on the stage before, whereas guys like Kupp, I think we saw a career year last year with Brandon Cooks added there, Robert Woods healthy for the entire year, Todd Gurley, them involving Gerald Everett a little bit more. Pierre Garçon, obviously there's a whole bunch of competition for targets now. Devin Funchess, I'm not drafting. There's just a whole bunch of players who are going ahead of him that I would take, but not guys like, maybe not Randall Cobb. You mentioned Jamison Crowder like him, Marquise Goodwin. Those guys I'd take over him.
Are we in any leagues this year? Because I'm going to enjoy taking Cooper Kupp.
So I want to talk about this. So Matt, does this mean like I'm okay with people telling me that because I think the offense was designed for Cooper Kupp with the way he operated last year. However,
are you fading Robert Woods? Are you fading Brandon Cooks, Todd Gurley?
That's what I'm saying. You basically have to say there's a step back for some of these players, right?
Yeah, there is. And I think that what you're really looking at, or you have to give Jared Goff his due and actually say that he's a pretty good player, and that he's going to only get better. And I think that is actually going to be the case because, again, this was only his first year in that offense. He's a second-year player. And on top of that, he had new receivers. I mean, all those guys were new. And one of the things about Cooper Kupp that people underestimate is how many red zone targets he actually got and how little red zone targets Brandon Cooks got wherever he goes, because Brandon Cooks is not a red zone guy. Again, it comes down to being rugged and being able to catch ball in traffic. Sammy Watkins had 7 touchdowns last year. I don't think those are going to go to Robert Woods. I think they're going to go to Cooper Kupp. More of them will. So I actually think that while it's risky from the stats guys to actually look at it and say, oh, he's going to have a bump up in touchdowns, and you don't want to rely on touchdowns, I think that his form and function in the offense is only going to get better and bigger. And when you have a defensive coordinator, like a really good defensive coordinator, career guy, and Mike Zimmer, who's now a head coach, obviously, with the Vikings, say the best receiver on that team last year wasn't Sammy Watkins, wasn't Robert Woods, it was Cooper Kupp. I think that people are underrating him.
You know, and Goff only threw the ball 477 times this year. If he throws an extra 70 times, which is not that much, 540 passes, they could all get better. I mean, I don't think Brandon Cooks is going to get better. I mean, I've got him lower in my rankings than he finished each of the last 3 years. But I still like Brandon Cooks at his value because I think the Rams are just going to throw the ball more.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting conversation, and I could definitely see Goff upping his pass attempts, which could contribute to more volume being spread around the offense. But yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna have to look at that red zone stuff, Matt. That's a good point.
That's why we compete too. You know, it's fun.
Yeah. So we've got a couple more guys to talk about. Then we'll close out the show with stat of the day as always. The first one, well, we've got 2 tight ends at the end, but the first one is Tariq Cohen. You know, we've heard a lot of hype. Tags and I've talked about him a fair amount because we like this Bears offense with Matt Nagy. And Tariq Cohen he's the receiver. Jordan Howard is not much of a receiver. Nagy loves using receivers out of the backfield. Cohen is electric. He didn't really get a chance last year. Now, he's getting a lot of hype because of that, but I think his ceiling is limited because clearly Jordan Howard is still the lead back here. Matt, where do you have Tariq Cohen?
You know, he's one of, I like to kind of go against the grain, and I've kind of made a living kind of going against the grain with competition because of the fact that they're usually consensus with ADP, especially in experts, tend to create a herd mentality, and I try to exploit that. So with my drafting, I tend to try and pick a handful of players who I'm going to take a chance on, and I pinpoint, maybe I'll take a chance on one guy in kind of the first third of the draft, the second third, and the final third, or maybe 1 to 2 players. And Tariq Cohen's one of those guys for me. Because, and the reason when I look at it is that I did a study on him at the Rookie Scouting Portfolio site, and I have an extensive number of videos that I created that's on there, as well as at Footballguys, showing how Matt Nagy's offense, how that worked in Kansas City, and how Tyreek Hill was used. And then I showed actually John Fox's offense and how there were some similarities of how they used Tariq Cohen and could have used him more in that vein, especially early in the season. In the Falcons game, the season opener, they were targeting him deep. They were using him outside. They used him in a variety of ways as a receiver. And I thought, wow, if they continue to use him like this, he's going to be a major player, a major fantasy factor, just because of the way that they used him. And he was an excellent receiver at North Carolina, A&T. So he's someone that could go downfield, and they just stopped doing it. They didn't do it, after a while, or they did it very selectively, and they were much more conservative about it. But in this particular offense, the debate is whether Taylor Gabriel's going to have that role, or Anthony Miller's going to have that role, or is it going to be Cohen being split outside and they can use him in that fashion? And I'm willing to bet on that and fail. And I know that it's kind of a high risk, kind of volatile situation. But when you look at his skill set, I think there's room for both of those players, and that you could see him being kind of that what everyone always hopes James White will be, and I always just laugh because I'm not a James White fan. He's a smart player, but I'm not a fantasy fan of him. I'm a fan of his game, but I always go, okay, well, James White, keep hitting your head on the wall. Whereas I look at Tyreek Cohen, I think he could be that kind of option, or a Danny Woodhead with a deep game. If they stack the formations outside or stack the receivers outside more often, or they use him to be able to use a lot of motion the way that they use Tyreek Hill, they can actually create one-on-ones with safeties and linebackers that are just complete, utter mismatches that, can afford Mitchell Trubisky to throw the ball to wide open guys. Because remember, I think there's a stat, and Mike probably knows this, but there's a stat that I think Alex Smith, for the first time in his 13-year career, led the league, or was anywhere close to leading the league as a vertical, with vertical accuracy. And on top of that, the separation on routes was by far the greatest for Kansas City out of any other team. So he was throwing the wide open guys. And he's not going to have that in Washington, but when you look in Chicago, Matt Nagy might be able to set that up, and Tyreek Cohen could benefit.
Tags, do you have shares of Cohen?
I have some, and I loved him before the Bears started adding more and more players. I loved Cohen, but the thing is like with the players they have now in Taylor Gabriel and Anthony Miller, they operate in that intermediate area of the field where it's like, I'm worried about some of these targets being taken away from him. Now, I do think he's going to be a weapon, and I think that Nagy's going to be able to use him to the best of his ability. He's not a guy that you want to carry the ball, 10 times a game. That's just not who Cohen's ever going to be in the NFL, but I could definitely see a Darren Sproles type player. I think he's got the shiftiness if you get him in the open field, and they have enough threats in the offense to where Cohen's not going to be atop the defensive coordinator's list of priorities. So I do like him. I think there's an amount of risk there, but being where he's being drafted is like right around the RB 35 range. I think the risk is worth the potential reward there, because at worst he's going to be a flex option.
Whenever I hear the word shifty, I always think of Josh Cribbs. Do you guys remember him, the return specialist for the Browns?
Oh, how do you not remember Josh Cribbs?
Yeah, like if you guys are listening to this show and you don't remember him very well, or even if you do yourself a favor, go back and look at his highlight film, because it is just so much fun to watch.
For a big guy.
One of my favorite players I've ever watched.
Yeah. For a big guy, he moved pretty well.
Yeah, all right. Let's close this out by talking about two tight ends, and we're going to lump them together here because they're both being drafted in the same range. If you whiff on the safe guys, Kyle Rudolph, Delaney Walker, I would even say Trey Burton in that range. Even though he hasn't done it, I think that he's safe. Now, two people I don't really know if they're safe, George Kittle, David Njoku. Matt, we'll let you start first with these guys. What do you see? Are they worth drafting? Are they safe? I know what I think about one of them. The other one I can't make up my mind.
Yeah, I think George Kittle's going to work out pretty well, because Garoppolo, like I mentioned, the way that he plays in the pocket and is able to sustain the play within its structure, George Kittle's going to benefit from that. So I think that he's a guy that you can consider as maybe in the latter part of the draft, or at least in the latter half of the draft, where you can take him as your tight end one and wait on one. So I think he's a guy who's going to be kind of at the bottom range of that. Kind of your like tight end 10, 11 or 12 at the finish of the year. And then when you look at Njoku, you heard all the hype, which is that, how great he was as an athlete, and he really is, but whether or not he really even knew how to run a route last year. And when you look at what he did on film without being able to be a masterful route technician, it was impressive. The question is, the biggest issue with Tyrod Taylor in recent years has been his ability to find the tight end in the middle of the field. Taylor is going to bring that triple option offense element to the Browns, and that's going to make them a really strong run team, because the Bills were one of the best run teams in the league until last year, when the new coaching staff decided they were going to go and dismantle what Taylor did best, because they didn't want him on the team. Literally, they were just basically preparing to move on without him last year, and he forced his way to keep that team competitive regardless. So they're going to put him in Cleveland, and they're going to embrace that more with him, and even with Baker Mayfield when Mayfield eventually gets a chance to play in the future. But the thing is that the Bills, even when they embraced Tyrod Taylor, were showing him tape of all the times that Charles Clay was wide open in the middle of the field and he didn't find him. And so the fact that they were trying to get him to do that and it still wasn't happening, that concerns me a bit about Njoku. But again, Njoku is a guy that they also want to split outside more, and they may have to do that more often, obviously with the Gordon, Callaway, Corey Coleman, and all the other first round draft picks and other players that they've taken early who they've, either had to suspend, trade away, or just show that they're completely inept as an organization. So you're looking at a situation where, I think Njoku is a worthwhile risk, but you have to understand in your drafts that who are you taking risks on and what position and what round are you doing it? And if Njoku to me is a risk, so that means you have to take another tight end to feel pretty good about that risk. That means that where are you taking other positions to compensate for that are going to be lower risk in your draft plan? Because otherwise you're going to be overspending at that position and creating scenarios where it's not worth it.
Tags, I just released my updated tight end rankings, and I know this is going to make some people die. Like Chris Harris is going to die. I've got David Njoku outside my top 20.
Oh, well, I mean, with the missing options from Cleveland now, I'm starting to actually move Njoku up. So if Chris was listening, he'd probably be smiling right now, but it has to do with the injuries surrounding him and like a lot of those vacated talent targets. So Njoku, as we've mentioned, I'm a fan of the talent. He's another one that was extremely developmental. I think the ceiling is massive on him, and I think that you should buy in dynasty formats. I would buy him as a top 7 tight end because he's tied to Baker Mayfield for the foreseeable future, and that's a really good thing for him. So I do like him in dynasty, but in redraft, I'm with Matt here. Is like if I don't get a top 10 guy, I'm probably waiting at the position, and I'm just going to draft a streamer. Streaming week 1, Vance McDonald is playing the Browns. Get it?
I'd much rather take a shot on Vance McDonald. I'd much rather take a shot on even Ricky Seals-Jones because there's no competition for targets, right? I mean, David Njoku's going to an offense that's not going to throw the ball 600 times like they did last year. They're going to throw the ball less than 500 times with Tyrod Taylor, and they've got all kinds of weapons. Yeah, I understand they've got stuff going on right now, but Jarvis Landry's going to be there. Josh Gordon's going to be there. Duke Johnson is still there. Antonio Callaway, we'll see what happens with him, but Njoku's at best the 4th option here. Maybe the 5th option.
I got an idea. Since the Browns are trading away players, let's have them trade away David Njoku. They could start Seth the Valve because that appears to be their guy. Let's have David Njoku traded to the Chargers so he could be a top 5 tight end with Phillip Rivers.
Can we just trade Jimmy Haslam?
Trade him and Hugh Jackson.
Can we trade him for a flying biscuit? I mean, I'd even take a soggy one in the dumpster.
There you go.
Yeah, I'd rather take Benjamin Watson and Austin Seferian-Jenkins too. Now Kittle, that's a different thing because Jimmy G passed to the tight end a ton last year. And I think that, Kittle, I'm not going to say he can be a superstar in this league, but I think he'll be a very good tight end for a long time. The way that, Greg Olsen looks. Like Greg Olsen was never the top tight end, but he was always right up there in that top 5 range. I think that's where Kittle's headed. Right now I've got him as a top 10 tight end.
Yeah, he's someone that's close again, but I'm just worried about the way that the offense is run. It's going to be a really spread around offense. I don't think you're going to get a consistent option there. I think Garrett Selleck is still going to be involved, so I don't have him as...
Yeah, I've got Selleck in my top 20. I've got him ahead of Njoku.
I don't think that I once I get outside the top 10 tight ends, I'm streaming the position. Like I'm not gonna spend draft capital on George Kittle just to hope for that breakout because he's being drafted as a tight end 1, and I don't feel like once you get outside the top 10 tight ends, you're not going to have a guy that's going to be even remotely consistent as a tight end 1.
Yeah, agree. All right, Tags, you want to finish this off with stat of the day, man?
I do, and it comes down to position scarcity. We were just talking about tight ends, quarterbacks. So did you know, in 2017, there were just 5 quarterbacks who performed as a top 12 quarterback in more than 50% of their games. Just 5. So, Bobby, my question I was going to ask you is that, do you believe that you could pick a streamer half the time?
To be top 12?
Yeah, if you can get it right half the time. Do you think you could do that?
It depends on what league I'm in. There's leagues where there's 18 quarterbacks gone, and I don't think you can pick a top 12 guy. Now, in week 1, there's a top 12 guy. It's Andy Dalton. I've got him in my top 12, and he's a streamer. I think there's better than 50% chance Andy Dalton will be in the top 12 week 1.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So if you could do it half the time, you're going to be so much better off because the only quarterbacks who performed as a QB1 more than 50% of the time were Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, Carson Wentz, and Alex Smith. That's right. Tom Brady was a QB1 50% of the time. So again, that's talking about like you're spending a high pick for Tom Brady. If you could pick a streamer correctly 45% of the time, 40% of the time, you're going to be better off because when you're taking someone like Brady or Cam Newton, you're passing on a player who's going to get some guaranteed touches. So that's why when we talk about the quarterback position and the fact that, people are waiting on it more and more, I think there's value to Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, those guys. But after them, it's like, if you don't get one of those two guys, seriously, just wait. You're better off.
Matt, are you doing the same thing? Is there a quarterback that you're taking this year?
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways that I'm playing this basically, which is, if I'm drafting with a certain strategy early, where I'm waiting on running backs, then it's really Russell Wilson who I'm taking. And if I can get Aaron Rodgers as my second option, I'll take one of those two guys. And that's where I'm going. If I can't get them, or I'm playing or I have to play a different strategy, then the guys that I'm aiming for are really, Jared Goff and Patrick Mahomes. And if I can get one of those two guys, usually after somewhere between rounds 9 and 12, I feel pretty good about that.
And I wanted to ask you before we let you go, who's like one player that you want to get in every league, like your favorite guy?
Is it Cooper Kupp?
No, but I like Cooper Kupp a lot. But I think the most underrated receiver in football still right now, at least in the circles that I travel, remains to be Marvin Jones. And I talk a lot about Marvin Jones, but I think that he is such a fantastic route runner, always has been. And I think that there's a little bit of a bias about him. And people are there's been so much talk about Kenny Golladay up and down, but he's kind of really a poor man's Juju Smith-Schuster with a little more speed in terms of how he's being used. And he benefits from Marvin Jones more than Marvin Jones benefits from him. And he's nowhere near ready to overtake Marvin Jones. I think Jones is still going to have a shot of being a top 10 receiver in the league again this year.
I love that. That is music to my ears. It's a good way to end the show.
Marvin Jones, I was higher on him, and then it's like the whole Golladay thing. It's just like when you look at the splits when Golladay played and how much fewer targets Marvin Jones saw, it has me worried a little bit, but I'm with you in the fact that Marvin Jones is a superior talent.
All right, guys, that's all for today's show. Matt, thank you for coming on.
Man, it was my pleasure. You guys are a well-oiled machine.
Thanks. And thanks to the sponsor of today's show, Sleeperbot. We're doing the listener league through Sleeperbot because their site is just so awesome and good for fantasy football. You can go to fantasypros.com/listener league to enter. Check out sleeper.app. And also remember, we're giving away a signed David Johnson jersey from Pristine Auction. Go to fantasypros.com/contest. For Mike Tagliere, I'm Bobby Sylvester. Thanks for listening and enjoy your football.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.